Now that you've found UBN Radio and discovered our quality talk shows, it's time to spread the word to friends, family, and the universe. 24 hours of music and talk. Radio without limits. That's why people keep coming back for more. That's ubnradio.com.
Hello. This is the Larry Yates As Is show. And this isn't Larry. Larry is on the road. This is Carolyn Wilkins, Reverend Carolyn, as you often call me. And I am here. I can never be in the footsteps of Larry Yates. However, I'm shining my own light here in the studio as we begin a program. It is a delight to be here. I have had the opportunity to travel around the world almost in the last month. And Larry is also on a very long trip, and he likes to divulge it when he comes back, so I won't tell you where he is. But for the next show, you'll get to hear more about his travels also. But I'd like to say welcome to the Larry Yates As Is show. We have as a special guest Ruth Broyde Sharone, and we'll be talking a little bit more about her in a few minutes. What I often begin with, and we're not going to have a lot of conversation today, but what is going on in the world today is quite interesting. And because I was out of the country, I got an opportunity to see the U.S. from the perspective of another part of the world. And I will only say that our national news that is often highlighted by our political conversations looks very small and insignificant to the rest of the world. When you're having conversations with Trump in his ideas, his backlash, even it didn't matter whether it was Democratic or Republican, it didn't sound like we were looking for the best of our country as we were doing as we were watching CNN and other things from India. And I was quite amazed, really. I guess you can be embarrassed when you're sitting by yourself, because I didn't watch TV in a group. But I sat there really wondering, there has to be a way for us to elevate the conversation, the ideas, and the goals that we have for our country. Because when you look at it from a microscope from across the world, the glory, the dignity, and the hope that has been a part of the brand, really, of the United States seems to be fading away. So I just like to have that as a thought for the day. And you're welcome to send us emails or call in and let us know what your thoughts are about how our country can elevate our conversation. So with that said, let me go on and introduce Ruth. And I guess I should probably tell you about me for those who may be new listeners. I'm Reverend Carolyn Wilkins. I'm the executive producer of this Larry Yates As Is show. I'm also the president of Keynote Entertainment, which is a distribution, marketing, and consulting company in the entertainment business. And I'm the founder of PeaceNet, which is an organization that has an intention of elevating the vision of peace in the world. And it's the voice of women and children and the vision of peace. And in addition, I'm the chairperson of the Culver City Interfaith Alliance and a minister at a local church in California called Agape International Spiritual Center. So we're local as a building, but we're international as output of our message. So with that said, let me give you a little background on Ruth. I asked her for a short bio. She gave me a long bio, but
that was my short version.
It was the short version of all the things she's done in the world. And I've known Ruth for quite a while now. And she serves as the co-chair of the Southern California Parliament of World Religions, and she's been in that position since 2007. She travels the world frequently, going to college campuses to present her interfaith program and an award-winning film called God and Allah Need to Talk. Ruth has led multiple interfaith pilgrimages of Christians, Muslims, and Jews on journeys to Cairo, to Sinai, to Jerusalem in the spring of 93, 94, 95, and 2000. And in 2013, in recognition of her contributions to bridge building, Ruth was inducted into the Martin Luther King Advisory Board of Morehouse College. And in 2015, she received a special commendation as an interfaith leader from Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti. She has a book called Minefields and Miracles, which has received some literary awards and endorsements from many prominent religious leaders. And she has been a writer for the Interfaith Observer for many years. And there's more about her that she will tell you, but the other thing that I want to share with you, she and I participate in several organizations together, the Culver City Interfaith Alliance, the Parliament of World Religions, and UDC. There are many things that we come together for. And I've had the opportunity for her to share a new CD and a musical called Interfaith the Musical. And without further explanation, here is Ruth Broyde Sharone.
Thank you so much, Reverend Carolyn. It's just a delight to be here and to be with an interfaith colleague who knows what's really happening in the world today.
Yes. And what is so intriguing is that Ruth and I were both in India at the same time. And we didn't know we were going. So our work has paralleled in the past because our focus is on interfaith harmony, and it's also with an involvement of peace and nonviolence. So, Ruth, what were you doing in India?
Well, the first part, and I was traveling with my daughter, Leora, who's going to be 33 soon. And so aside from having a special mother-daughter journey, the first part for 2 weeks, we were in Rajasthan. It was a special music dance tour organized by Yuval Ron and Sajita Bensur, who is, Sajita is Indian, Sufi, and she is married to an Israeli composer musician who has been studying Indian music for more than 20 years. And so she and Yuval has an interfaith ensemble that has performed internationally. So they created a special tour to introduce us to the different kinds of music that is played in Rajasthan, depending upon whether it's the Sufi musicians or the Hindu musicians, and also the dance of the gypsies and so forth, so that we could further appreciate the development of world music. And one of the highlights of the trip was when the local musicians in India and Rajasthan would invite Yuval and his musicians to play together with them. And there was always this amazing synergy and understanding of how musics fit together so well and people fit together so well. And that's what we forget until we're reminded very much in the arts that that is so true.
Absolutely.
And the second part was when we were on our own. We visited Varanasi, which is the oldest inhabited city in the world, going back 6,000 years, and where there are mostly Hindu shrines there, although they're also nearby is the town where Buddha preached. And from there we went to Calcutta, and we had the opportunity to be with the people in Belar Mat, which is the headquarters and the spiritual center, the heart of the Ramakrishna order, from which Vivekananda came. And as you know, because you're active in the parliament, Vivekananda was the first Hindu monk to come to America in 1893 for the first parliament.
Yes.
And his legacy, even though he didn't even reach age 40, because he was one of the stars of that parliament, is so his legacy so strong that there are Vedanta societies all over the world that celebrate his philosophy and his interfaith approach to the world. And then the last part of the trip, I was in Pondicherry, which is where it used to be a French colony, and I visited Auroville, which was founded by Sri Aurobindo, and the mother, they call her, a woman originally from Algeria, Egypt, France, and a universal philosophy, and they have an ashram there as well and a meditation center, which is spectacular. So I was kind of moving, as I was moving around, I was looking at devotion and how people relate to God and how India is a cradle for so many important religious spiritual philosophies. Until today, like we mentioned just before the program started, that the spirituality of India is just, it comes out of every pore, every corner, every place. You can't miss it. It's not a Sunday or a Saturday or a Friday event. It's there 24/7, 365 days a year.
So let me ask you, what were one or two most significant things that you gained from being there? What happened to you that you will never forget? And what happened that you'd like to continue?
I was in Ajmer, which is near Pushkar in Rajasthan. All of us were there on the trip. And we were invited to an annual celebration of the Sufi Saint Secondary School, which was founded by a prominent Sufi. The Ajmer is the most important city for Sufi pilgrimage in India. And it goes back, the lineage is hundreds of years, and we also have some current branches in America. The Sufi Order International, Pirzia community has come out of that. So one particular man there, and he had an idea, which at the time when he had it, even his mother thought he was crazy, but he wanted to create, it was during the time in the 90s when the Muslims and the Hindus were at each other's throats, and he thought, this is not the way to go. I want to create a school to teach children the values of universal love and Sufi teachings. And so he decided he would start a school, and all the Hindu and Muslim leaders at the time, they laughed at him. And as I said, even his mother thought it was a crazy idea. But here he is, 20 years later, they've had close to 1,000 people go through their schools, and many, many parents who are not Sufi, not Muslim, want their kids to go to the school because of the high level of academic level, and also because of the core teachings of brotherhood, of being respectful, of honoring each other, and a high emphasis on the arts, again, to convey that idea. So seeing the children perform that day at their annual event, and then seeing how the audience responded when Yuval Run and his two musicians and all of us had learned a song that we both sang and signed simultaneously, seeing the audience response to that was so inspiring because, as we go around the world, and even if we don't speak the local language, we're looking for some way to bridge the gap. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that it's usually music and the arts. Mm-hmm. And so that was one of the strongest moments I experienced there. And the other, I would say, is, well, everything was special, but one of them was in Varanasi, on the Ganges, and in India they call it the Ganga, Mother Ganga, mm-hmm. and people from all over the world come, and 365 days a year, every night, they have a special ceremony on the shore, and while the ceremony is going on, at the same time, the funeral pyres are nearby because, according to Hindu tradition, when someone dies, the bodies are cremated. But it's not just a cremation in a closed situation where afterwards mm-hmm. people get the ashes. This is a public cremation, burning of the body, and they chant the entire time to escort the soul to the next world. And so you cannot leave there unscathed by the images, the colors of the flames, orange, red flames licking the sky, midnight, the reflections on the water, the chanting and the chanting goes on all the time. Mm-hmm. And Varanasi is also considered an art and music center. And so they have musicians from all over the world that are coming and playing publicly all the time. So you have this sense around experience of that's spiritual, that's visual, that's visceral, that's musical, and frankly, it was, every place I was memorable, but I think Varanasi was one of the most. And we stayed in a guest house mm-hmm. where there were beautiful murals on the wall, and my daughter is an artist, and before we left, she offered to paint a mural for the guest house. And so mm-hmm. her whole mm-hmm. last night in Varanasi was spent on the landing of the stairs painting the relationship between the sun, the fiery sun, the flames of the crematoria, and the cool blue the Ganges. And she didn't sleep that night. And I think for her, one wants to leave something behind when mm-hmm. you're there because you receive so much. So that for me was very exciting too. And also the people I met along the way. What extraordinary people.
Oh, wonderful.
You know about that.
I know about that. And I can tell from the glimmer in your eyes that they captured your heart while being there. And it's so interesting that you wound up being filled up with the music and the dance. And that's what my trip wound up being about. I was invited to a program that's given by the Art of Living. And the Art of Living Foundation provides training and classes in breathing, meditation, yoga, and a way of happiness, teachings of happiness. And the Art of Living was created by Sri Sri Ravi Shankar 35 years ago, and this was their 35th anniversary. They've been extremely successful in the work they've done and have learning teams in over 112 countries. And Sri Sri himself has been a humanitarian as well as a teacher and has walked into situations as a mediator in war-torn situations. So an example that I'm familiar with is during the Afghanistan war, he asked to go and meet with the troops and the Afghanis as well as those on the American side and others who were helping in the fight. And there is a specific area that is set aside for people from the outside coming in and entering the compounds. And he said, no, this isn't where I want to be. I want to actually meet the troops because these were neutral zones, but he wanted to go into the war zone, which to those who were paying attention and those who were in charge of security became a crisis almost, because most people, number one, do not want to go into the war zone, but number two, they're not always prepared for people going into the war zone because they don't want to be responsible if anything happens. But this is a man of peace who takes his peace with him. And he was able to enter into beyond the gates into the war zone. And as a result of him being there, the troops literally did a ceasefire on their own without being asked to. And they asked for time with him. So he had leaders coming to him for prayer, others coming to him. He's very well respected around the world.
I know he also invited Israelis and Palestinians to come and be with him on his ashram.
Oh, all the time.
Right.
That's a consistent thing. The program that I went to is called the World Cultural Festival. It was the 35th anniversary of the Art of Living, and there was a big dream that was put together. The slide that you will see on the screen shows that this was the coming together of people from 155 different nations. There were over 8,500 musicians who completed what was called the Art of Living Orchestra. They had over 10,000 dancers and singers who performed over a 3-day period. And it was probably the most spectacular thing I've ever been to. I have not been to the Olympics, but I know the Olympics is done every 4 years and they have thousands of people participating. But this, over a 3-day period, I know was bigger than the Olympics because of the number of people involved. They had a stadium built the size of 7 football fields, brought dancers from many, many countries, and there were over 1 million people who attended every day. Now, it's hard to fathom because when I was first invited and I got a letter as a distinguished guest to attend, and it said we're expecting 3.5 million people. And while I do this work around the world, I'm always impressed when people have goals in mind. But when I read that, I just laughed, really, because I said, right, how are they going to have how do you get 3 million people in any one place? Well, I didn't think about it that much, but when I got there and attended the program, I was just blown away by the order, the ease and grace in which everything happened. And they had heavy rains the first day, which made it slippery and wet, but they handled everything with grace and ease. And I was just touched by the beauty of the people who participated. There were world leaders from, I mentioned, 155 countries who were all there to speak about peace and nonviolence. And the vision that Sri Sri Ravi Shankar had was that this is not a discussion of nonviolence. This was a display of nonviolence. So as Ruth said also, there's no better way to bring people together than through dance and music, because there is a harmony that's built, there's a cooperation that's built, there's an underlying understanding. Whether you speak the same language or not, people are able to put music on, and you can be from Russia, from Germany, from Israel, from Iran, and all can dance to the same music. And it was the most spectacular opportunity to see that happen with musicians, with artists, with singers, with dancers. So I'm still filled, really, with the vibration of not only the music, but the inspired thought that came from that gathering. And there are actually 2 programs in the afternoon and evening from 5 until 10 p.m. was the World Cultural Festival, and that was all the music and dance and people speaking, including the Prime Minister and the President of India, prime ministers from other countries, interfaith leaders, which I participated. But there was also a gathering in the daytime called the Global Leadership Forum, and that was more of a business tactical standpoint of how do we do this. So the evening was a celebration, and during the day there were esteemed leaders from many countries from all over the world who shared their ideas, some of the programs they had, some of the successes they had for quelling things like domestic violence and homelessness. There were people who were secretaries of state, people who were one person I met, who I had actually met in South Africa several years before, was the minister of regional cooperation from Tel Aviv, Israel. And we shared some thoughts, and he spoke and talked about the programs they have there of bringing Christians and Jews together, Muslims, and making sure that there are always opportunities for people coming together to create peace. So I was just filled with knowing that any vision that I had was already elevated by what I saw was possible. Because sometimes I know I'm speaking to people who are visionaries and people who have really new thoughts. So when you think about some possibilities, whether it's about your children, your grandchildren, about your country, your community, sometimes we have these thoughts about us, but we're not always sure if it's possible, if what we're thinking will ever be seen in our lifetime. So I can honestly say that I got to participate in something that allowed me to see millions of people come together for peace and nonviolence. So I know it's possible, and I know that the teaching is spread, the agreement and the intention and the vision for peace has been spread by multiples of people around the world. So that's what I wanted to share. I think through some of the pictures you are seeing just a slight glimpse of what I got a chance to participate in. And you can go to the World Cultural Festival. There's a website for it. There's also a CNN broadcast of the program if you're interested in looking at that. So with that said, it's so interesting that both Ruth and I have been touched by the music. I spent my life as a dancer and a businesswoman, and I put aside the dance so that I could be part of the corporate world. And at the same time, I really know that dance will always inform me and connect me. And wherever I go in the world, I dance. So what I wanted to share now is a little bit, Ruth, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about two things. One is your book, Minefields and Miracles, and the other is your musical. So please share with us Minefields and Miracles.
So here's the cover of the book, which is a mandala that has on it both a globe and it has tentacles and it has light. And basically the concept is that we are all connected by one giant golden web. Sometimes it takes special glasses to see it. In my case, this is the subtitle is Why God and Allah Need to Talk. And I call this, this is a memoir about my adventures and misadventures in interfaith. And why Minefields and Miracles is because this work is not easy. And it sounds glamorous, and you get to travel the world and you get to meet all these different people and different faiths and different cultures and costumes and languages. But the truth is that there are many areas in which when people start to speak about their faith or have fears about other people that are not like themselves, that you can get into big trouble. And that actually happened to me when on one of these interfaith pilgrimages in the year 2000, when we were invited, our group, there were 36 of us, we were invited to the Al-Azhar Mosque, which is the most important mosque and learning center for Muslims in the Middle East. And many of us from our group spoke, and we said to at the time, the head imam, that we want this to be Muslims, Christians, and Jews. We want our Muslim brothers and sisters to be part of this because we're all part of the Abrahamic family. And later we were interviewed by a young journalist who we thought resonated and understood our mission. And it turned out that a terrible article was published on the front page of one of the major Egyptian newspapers that questioned us, our motives, and that said terrible things about me personally, which were so antithetical to what I was actually doing in the world. And I was so crushed, and I couldn't believe that. And it took me a while to understand that that was one of the minefields, and that I would have to be strong enough to hear lies spread about me and people question my motives, because I was doing it with sincerity, and yet that would come up. And then people would say, well, why do you still do the work? And I know you'll understand this, Carolyn, when I say this. I think those of us who work in this arena feel that we've been tapped on the shoulder, and that it's a ministry. It's not just something that we enjoy doing. It's something that we feel called to do. And so even with the mishaps and the minefields, there are enough miracles in the field so that just like you had a miracle, that was at seeing 3 million people together. My miracle happened in 2004 at the Barcelona Parliament of the World's Religions, when I saw 9,000 people from 85 countries, 200 religions together for the first time. And I said, oh, this is interfaith paradise. You had an advanced version of that.
Well, I saw that in South Africa.
When you went to Cape Town, right?
For Parliament, yes.
So you heard it even earlier.
I heard it earlier. Yes.
So anyway, I wrote the book, and a friend of mine said this is a primer for interfaith work in the trenches, because most of my experiences have been about doing grassroots work. And
let me ask you a question, though. You do interfaith work. I label my work interfaith and intercultural.
Right.
And because they are two different things, but they blend together.
Right. Yeah.
And what I have often found is that even if we are trying to bring together faiths, there are cultural boundaries and expectations and taboos that get in the way of the faith coming together. So, for example, when you just told me that story of what you would have liked to have seen in Egypt, there's a part of that story that made me think that there was probably a cultural miscommunication because of just the male-female and the role of the female and what was going on, that had to be addressed in another level before you could have a conversation about the fates. Did you have any sense of that?
No, I didn't have a sense of that it had to do with gender, but they took me...
No, I didn't say gender. I said culture.
Well, because of women's role. I mean, I did have... There were times during the last 30 years when I was aware of breaching cultural norms, like with the mayor of an Arab village in Israel, when I went up and looked at him directly in the eyes and spoke to him in a way that could have made him uncomfortable. But it was such a crucial moment. I knew if I could get him to imagine something about what he would consider being a peaceful development in his village, of if he could visually come to something, that I could get him on board. And so I took that chance. And later, in retrospect, it was kind of nervy of me, audacious to do it. But I was willing to do it at that moment, because when I did get him to imagine I asked him what would be his vision of peace in this particular part of the village where we were trying to create something special to bring Israelis, Palestinians, Muslims, Jews, Christians, and people from around the world together. He said he would like to see a grove of 1,000 olive trees. And the moment he saw that image in his mind, I knew he was on board. So I took the chance of being brazen according to their cultural standards, and going and standing in front of him and looking him directly in the eyes and just asking him what was his dream. But I agree with you. I mean, one of the more amusing parts of the cultural differences is that I went to attend a service for Palm Sunday in a little small town in Kannur, India.
Yes.
And outside the church were all these shoes. Well, in churches, people don't take off their shoes, but because they're in India and because the Hindu tradition is to remove your shoes before entering a holy place, all these shoes of Christian people were outside. And I was thinking, here again, there's a blending and an understanding of culture and tradition. And, you're right, I don't say intercultural, but inevitably it is intercultural. You can't avoid that. But the main reason I got involved was, I think, because I saw how religion became a divisive factor among us. And I felt that if we could truly get to know each other, and that would include acculturation of really getting into each other's lives, customs, practices, etc., that the religious differences would not define our relationship anymore. They would make them more interesting, but they wouldn't divide us.
Yes. So before we go to the musical, Jarvis, how much time do we have?
About 15.
Okay.
Well, 13.
I was going to say, okay. All righty. So given that, let us do one of the songs from the musical, and then we'll have you talk about it. So the first song is called
I'm a Buju, about the new development in hybrid religion.
So we're going to play that. Are you able to play that now? I'm laughing already just at the title. I have heard it before.
I'm a Buju. I'm Buddhist and I'm Jewish. I'm a Buju. Why choose only one when you can choose two? Forget the pros and cons when they're all true. I'm a Buju. I emulate the Buddha and his worldview. I like to meditate and then to argue. I agonize all day, a true Jew.
I'm a Jufi. I'm Jewish and I'm also Muslim Sufi. You're probably asking, how can that be? Well, let's just say it's spiritual alchemy. I'm a Jufi. I fast on Ramadan and then Yom Kippur. I pray the Amidah or I do Zikr. Whichever one, I can finish quicker.
I'm a Hindu. I'm Hindu and I'm Jewish. I'm a Hindu. I'm loyal to my rabbi and my guru. I study ancient Sanskrit and then Hebrew. I'm a Hindu. And when I told my mother, she went bonkers. She said, "You're not from India, you're from Yonkers." but devotion of the heart is what conquers. The devotion of the heart. We are hybrid. We're happy to be living on our own grid. On every city block, we are the new kid. I'm Buju.
I'm Jufi.
I'm Hindu through and through. Through and through.
So I know you are all laughing. And maybe some of you weren't laughing if you are more traditional. But those of us who have been involved in this interfaith world have seen the coming together, and depending on which spiritual community you're in, you've known somebody next to you who may be practicing both things. So Ruth, tell us a little bit more about what inspired this musical and that song and some of the others.
Well, I have a musical background, and I've written original songs from time to time, and I've spent many years revising songs that existed for occasions, for people, for follies, and so forth. So, but I've been walking every day for several years now, and one day I just felt a song come out, and I
Was that the first song?
That was the first song. It was called What If When You Awoke? And I'll just say the first 4 lines because then you'll understand why I wrote the musical. Mm-hmm. It goes, what if when you awoke, you were wearing a stranger's shoes? What if when you awoke, you shared your enemy's extremist views? What if when you awoke, you'd think in color, not black and white? What if when you awoke, you could imagine not being right? What if we all could see the beauty of one expanding humanity? So then it goes on, it talks about the Mormons learning about Hinduism, about the Muslims respecting the Hindu the Tantra expertise. I mean, it goes on really getting people to think about moving, crossing borders. So I just wrote it, and I didn't know what to do about it. And then a few days later, another song came out. We have more in common than we knew. We have more in common than we knew. And then I started to see there was like a pattern, and I thought, what's going on here? Mm-hmm. And then it struck me that I was being used. Mm-hmm. I was a vehicle for something that would be the summation of my experience of 3 decades of learning about all the different religions and an understanding that you spoke about mm-hmm. earlier, that the arts are the most powerful vehicle to move people, to get people in a resonant, unified field of understanding. And that's the field we want to be in when we make decisions about other people and ourselves and the world. Mm-hmm. So, and then I thought, well, I've made documentary films for more than 30 years. I wrote a book and so forth, but I write articles, but I'm thinking, how could I reach the most people simultaneously with the message of the new world as we envision it, as we have glimpsed it, right? And I thought, well, if I could write a musical and have it on Broadway, and it was funny enough and delightful enough and visually exciting enough, people would come to see it, even people who are not supposedly religious or people who don't think about the subject, and they would get the message. They would get it through viscerally in their bodies through what they see on the stage. And so then, I've written close to 30 songs already, and I only could afford to have 11 of them arranged for the album, but right now I'm working on the storyline, and I'll be doing a crowdfunder this month as well to move to the next stage, and that is to have what they call a stage presentation, which is without choreography, without costumes, but
Right.
it will have the storyline and the music that goes with it. And Carolyn, I even went to new musical boot camp for 6 weeks and to work on the development of the story. And now I need professional help with that.
Well, wonderful. It's so clear that the thoughts and the calling is with you all the time.
That's
Because
right.
if you're walking, and that happens to me also, actually walking seems to be one of the clearest ways to get spiritual insight
Right.
for me.
I agree.
And I know you're all laughing about the words of that. And we have another one that we're going to listen to before we close. But I want to say how joyful I am to have you on the program.
Thank you. Mutual.
That the work that we're doing it's so intriguing that we've had these experiences in India together. And I wanted to go back to just that moment in India where you mentioned a little bit earlier. There's so many people there. Before I went, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. But because I grew up in New York City and have been to all major cities like Chicago and New York, and I've been to Johannesburg, South Africa, and they're all very busy cities.
Tumultuous, yeah.
Tumultuous. Been to Accra, Ghana, where traffic is, you've never seen traffic like you're seeing in Accra, Ghana. And so I was prepared in my mind for lots of people. I just didn't know how it was going to all show up. And what I wound up seeing in the middle of New Delhi was lots of traffic. But underneath it all, there was still some order because there were a lot of people. And this was what's so intriguing. And I don't know if I gave one of the pictures for you to show. But it was a combination of new cars, old cars, these little motor
Tuk-tuks.
driven totes,
Rickshaws.
the
And cows. Don't forget the cows.
wait a minute, hold on. What I'm seeing though is a combination of people being on motorcycles, really not the big ones, but the scooters, as well as bicycles, walking, and everybody moving together. And what they did that was so intriguing that baffled us is in Los Angeles, people blow their horn when they're upset with you. So we heard all this horn blowing and we're like, is everybody mad? What's going on? And they blow their horn to let you know they're passing.
Right.
It's a whole nother, it was a twist. It was just the opposite of what we thought. They were being kind and courteous,
right.
saying, beep, I'm going to pass you.
Right.
And people were passing each other, no lanes, no no lines drawn, no lanes, and lots of people moving, and it was fascinating. So just having that new insight into how people can flow together is amazing. So what I wanted to do before we have our closing thought is to play one other song, and we may have to just do 2 minutes of it before we leave.
Just introduce it really quickly.
No.
No?
We'll just play it, and
All
then
right.
you'll say something afterwards.
Okay,
Yes. The
What
children.
if my children
What
go
if my
astray?
children? Yes.
What if my children go astray? What if they choose another way? What happens to our family tree? What happens to my legacy? What if my children leave the fold? Who will be with me when I'm old? What of our faith and history? Will they become quaint memories? I have loved you faithfully. Oh my God, have you forsaken me?
What if my parents disown me? What if I challenge destiny? What happens to our family tree? What happens to my legacy? What if my parents wail and cry? Unless I'm willing to comply, to serve their faith and history, why do they have this hold on me?
As you're hearing this song, you're intrigued by perhaps what the rest of the musical is. But I know you were inspired really by that question about our children. So as a closing thought, Ruth, I'd like you to just give us a closing thought on your work in the world and the musical briefly.
People respond to this song in particular because of the rapid change that's happening around the world, not just technologically, but in our relationships to our own faith, in seeing that our children may actually stray from what we hold sacred and what we want to pass on to them. And so there's a kind of agony that is also happening in the generations that are coming up now, where they feel that their parents don't understand them and what they're aspiring to spiritually, and the parents feel somehow that they've been, their legacy is not going to be sustained. So the musical is a chance for us to laugh and cry a little bit about what's happening, and to, most of all, to celebrate our cultural and religious diversity.
Thank you so much. And we'll let you know when the musical will be available and seen, and how we're going to move forward, or how Ruth is going to move forward with that work.
The CD is available now. If you could mention that, that'd be great.
I wanted to say thank you so much for a wonderful program, for elevating the consciousness of what we're doing in the world around interfaith and intercultural coming together. And the CD is available on Amazon.com?
No, it's available on writing to me at interfaiththemusical.com.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
I want to thank everyone who is listening, and continue to listen for more opportunity to share the thoughts that we have about coming together in harmony and sacred unity. This is Carolyn Wilkins saying goodbye and thank you. And as Larry ends the program every week, a nation can rise no higher than it elevates its women. So I thank Ruth for being here today, and I appreciate being here today. And a shout out to Larry as he's on his international trip. Peace and blessings, everyone.
Thank you so much.